Hi, everyone. Welcome to Read It Again, online author series. This week we have Emily Adrian and Kerry Winfrey. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
So before we started, we were having great conversations about pie and childhood and motherhood, and it was fun. So we're just going to carry it on to live so people can watch it. So Emily and Kerry are good friends. And before I introduce you guys, how did you meet?
That's a really, it's kind of complicated. We met online officially.
Yes.
We just sort of like locked eyes across a crowded internet.
It was like a
Very romantic,
fateful friendship, because then after we'd been emailing for a while, and we ended up moving to Ohio, only about like an hour and a half from where I live now. So it really was like fate.
And it was really close to where you grew up. So when I asked you what you knew about this random town in Ohio, you knew like quite a bit. Like you had like pizza recommendations.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, let me introduce you guys and then we'll get into it. Let's start with Emily. Emily Adrian is the author of 2 critically acclaimed young adult novels, Like It Never Happened and The Foreseeable Future. Everything Here is Under Control, which is the one we're discussing today, is her first adult novel. She lives in New Haven, Connecticut with her husband, her son, her dog, Hank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kerry Winfrey grew up in Belleville, Ohio, where she spent most of her time reading inappropriate books at the library. Not much has changed. Kerry writes for Hello Giggles and blogs at welcometoladyville.com. She lives in Columbus, Ohio with her husband, their son, and their dog, Merlin. You can find her on Twitter at Kerry Ann. At Kerry Ann.
Yep.
Well, welcome, guys. Okay, so if you guys could give a little summary of both your books, I love them. I just devoured them. I listened to the audiobooks. That's all I've done for the last 2 weeks. Immersed myself in your books.
Nice.
So, who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
So my book is about a woman who has just had a baby, and she's like super overwhelmed and sleep deprived and frustrated with what she perceives to be the sort of half-assed efforts of her partner. So one night she spontaneously throws the baby in the car, ditches her partner in New York City, and drives to her hometown in rural Ohio, where she shows up on the doorstep of her childhood best friend, to whom she hasn't really spoken in about a decade. And she just says, like, I'm here and I need your help.
Okay, Kerry.
Not Like the Movies is kind of the sequel companion novel follow-up to Waiting for Tom Hanks. And it is about Chloe, who hates romantic comedies and is kind of a cynic about love. But unfortunately, her best friend Annie wrote a movie that is loosely based on her life. So she finds herself in a rom-com, even though she does not want to be.
So the one theme that I see really that connects to your books is friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And how, like, you know, they say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes you just form friendships that are more important or deeper than your family relationships. And when I was reading the 2, even if I hadn't read them together with the 2 of you in mind, I would have still pulled that out as themes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like in both of our books, they're about friendships that are not just easy, like kind of friendships where somebody does something that is kind of terrible.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think in both cases, like it's hard for the protagonist to sort of figure out where those friendships fit into their lives, because we really, as a culture, we want to put friendship like several notches below like the relationship you have with your spouse or with your child. And when you're kids, it's like not a problem to say that like your best friend is the most important person in your life. But when you're in your late 20s, as both of I think my protagonist is like 31 and yours is like 28, 27.
29, maybe. I don't remember.
We don't know. You start making decisions about like how you're going to live your life and who your family is. And it becomes like fraught to try and figure out who your best friend is and where she ranks like on the list of important people.
I think it's becoming more common to. In fact, I was just having this conversation with my kids. Their favorite uncle is not related to us. He's a friend of the family. So I think it's more accepted now to put your friends up with your family. You know what I mean? Especially if you come from a background where your family wasn't there for you, but your friends were. Which is is the case in both your books.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So we were talking before we started, Kerry, you basically all the pies and the movies, right? They're really you. Like that is you.
Yeah, that is me. I just, like I said before, I do just kind of take all of my obsessions and put them into books, and then I don't ever have to do any research because I have lived that research. Like that's just my life.
Do you have any obsessions you haven't written about?
Yeah, like do you have to develop new obsessions?
Well, that's the thing is when I told my husband Hollis, who Emily knows, I told him what Not Like the Movies was about when I was writing it, and all the stuff that I liked in it, like yacht rock and I don't know what else. And he was like, "You're gonna run out of things that you're obsessed with," but I'm not. Because I get like really obsessed with a lot of things. It just kind of happens.
I never heard the term yacht rock before.
Okay.
That's hard to say, actually. Yacht.
I know. Seems like there should be another R in there.
You didn't coin that term though, right? That's I feel like I've seen it on like the satellite radio stations in a rental car.
Yes, like there's a Pandora station for it. Sometimes your definitions are kind of loose and I don't agree with them. But yeah, yacht rock, it's everywhere. It's taken over.
You mentioned it quite a few times in the book. What's you talk about pies a lot in this one. What is your personal favorite pie?
My personal favorite is probably a cherry pie. But I will accept any pie. I'm not picky.
Emily, what's your favorite pie?
Probably blackberry.
Blackberry.
That's a good one.
But as previously stated, it has to be good pie. Not just any pie.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite pies I've ever made was blackberry, but
yeah,
like, they were good blackberries and I made it in my own house. I didn't like pick it up at Costco, you know?
Yeah.
I never checked. Were there recipes included in this?
There are not recipes in the book, but my publisher did a book club guide and I put some of my own personal family recipes in it. So
okay.
Yeah, if you want them, you can get the book club guide.
Well, I'll have to order that. Because there should totally, because this would be fun for book club. You read the book and then you just gorge on pies.
Yes, exactly. And you can like talk about rom-coms. It's a nice night. You have a soundtrack of yacht rock.
I had my kids, they're teenagers. We just watched When Harry Met Sally.
Oh, that's fun.
Because I read Waiting for Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, we have to watch When Harry Met Sally. And they liked it. And, they're 16, 17 years old. And they're like, yeah, that was good.
I just watched that too. I had my husband and I actually got away from our kid for a night on our 10th anniversary. And he was like, after we had sort of hung out all evening and we were winding down, he was like, we could watch When Harry Met Sally. I was like,
when the orgasm scene came on, I started like hitting my daughter in the arm, and she's like, I'm like, nothing. And then she was like, that was horrible. I mean, it was funny, but I never want to watch that with next to you again in my life.
I mean, the point of it is that it's like awkward in public and fake. So I don't know if that's better or worse than watching an actual orgasm scene.
Okay, so is Kerry here the Kerry in your book based on?
No.
No. Well, I just figured you stole the name, not necessarily like.
I think that I was pretty well into a draft of this book when I met Kerry. In fact, I know that by the time I met you in person, I had already written a draft because we were talking about how we were both writing our first adult books.
Yeah.
So then, the name was already in there, and it's spelled differently too. And I would say that character is nothing like you.
I know. For a lot of reasons, I do hope not.
So Emily, in your book, the first half of it, I have to say, was emotionally rough to get through.
Yeah,
because she's just in a bad state, and she's being very honest. Yeah, and then
I also found it emotionally rough to get through.
I won't give it away, but halfway through, I was like, "What?
Yeah,
wait, what?" and then I back, and I'm like, huh. That's all I'm saying. So, can you talk a little bit about the first half of that book, of your book?
Yeah. So in the first half of the book, she's basically just as postpartum as you can get. And I would say specifically, she's past the phase where you feel kind of euphoric and like in love with your newborn in that super like romantic, unprecedented way. She's kind of over like a lot of the bodily stuff that she thought wouldn't be an issue anymore. Like she's still in pain. She still hasn't quite figured out breastfeeding. She hasn't figured out how to get her baby to sleep. She hasn't figured out really even how to like set her baby down. She's, there's like she talks about having like ordered a breast pump, but she can't even begin to imagine how you would sit down and like read the instruction manual and figure out how to use that. Mm-hmm. Which I think is like, it's hard to explain this headspace if you've never taken care of babies. But I think it's relatable to people who have.
No, I think you did a great job because like we were talking, my kids are not my kids. So I have never experienced that, but I felt like I was experiencing when Yeah.
And so when I wrote the book, I had taken all these, my son had just been born, and I had taken all of these notes like on my phone in the middle of the night about just like how it felt and the thoughts I had surrounding like the narrative about motherhood I had been fed versus the actual experience of it. And pretty much all of those notes like ended up in the book in a pretty raw, like uncensored way. And I would say that when I was writing it, I was still sort of sleep deprived enough to not think like, oh, I'm going to publish this someday. I was just kind of going with it. And then by the time I was like sending it to my agent, or by the time it was out on submission, I was kind of like, I don't know if like I really want people reading this, but we're already on this train and it's too late to get off. And then as you mentioned, like there's a twist in the book that kind of throws everything into perspective. You understand that this is not just like a typical postpartum experience, but that this protagonist is really sort of untangling her past and how she got to this point where she can barely handle having a baby. Mm-hmm. And then it was like pretty cathartic to write that second half and to kind of like take care of her a little bit and like set her up to be okay someday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end, I really wanted like a epilogue because with her character, you don't know whether or not she will follow through or not, like based on her history. So I'm like, I want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kerry, where did you get the idea for your books?
Well, I had this Tumblr where it was called A Year of Rom-Coms, and I wrote about a different romantic comedy every week. And, like the themes and then the cliches, the scenes that kept coming up over and over again, like meet cutes and chases through the airport and stuff like that. And my blog was way more popular than my young adult books. Like I would get emails about the blog and I would never get emails about my books. And I kept thinking, I wish I could turn this blog into a book. And then it was one day when I was feeding my newborn, I had like this little journal where I would keep track of all the times I fed him and like how often he pooped and like write it all down. He was only like a couple weeks old. And I remember writing the title Waiting for Tom Hanks in there, thinking like, oh, wouldn't that be fun if somebody was obsessed with rom-coms like I am, but it was ruining their life. And then the book just kind of came from there. Like the title came first. And once again, I'd done all my research already.
This blog, by the way, is like some of the funniest stuff I've ever read on the internet.
What is it?
It's called A Year of Romcoms.tumblr.com.
Rom-coms. I hurt my finger, so I can't really type right now.
I still read like back issues of that blog for comfort sometimes. I think it's specifically hilarious if you are roughly our age. Kerry and I are in the early 30s, and you cover a lot of the like rom-coms that were really huge, like when we were in high school.
Yeah, so like if you grew up watching those movies, and then also like maybe if you haven't rewatched them since then, and you forget about a lot of the weirder parts.
Yeah. You highlight the absurdity in a lot of them. And then my favorite part is when you ask yourself a series of questions where you're like, was this movie good? Would I watch it again? Did I enjoy it? And the answers are like, it's often like, no, the movie is objectively horrible. But Kerry loved it, and we'll be watching it again shortly.
So what are your all favorites rom-coms?
My favorite rom-com and one of my like top 5 favorite movies of all time is definitely When Harry Met Sally.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of contemporary ones that I really like too. Like I really love Kerry. What's the movie with like Zoe Kazan and Harry Potter?
Oh, What If?
Yeah,
but in Canada.
You mentioned that in the book.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's super good.
So good. They have really good chemistry. It's really fun.
Yeah. I remember Notting Hill when I was in college and it came out. One of my best friends broke up with her boyfriend because she realized she does not have that type of relationship with him.
Oh my goodness. That's
like waiting for Tom.
The movie she's watching, she's gonna be really upset with it. We saw the movie. We went out for like Chinese, and then she pulled him aside and did it right there. It was like, yeah, no, this is not what we have. It's not going to happen.
I mean, I try never to compare my life to anything involving Hugh Grant. Yeah. It's not going to end well.
That is so true. Kerry, you had a question for Emily, right?
I did. Yeah. I was curious because we both wrote YA. We both had 2 young adult novels before we wrote our first adult novels.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how the experience of this has been different, not just the writing of it, but the perception, the whole publishing process. How do you think it's been different this time around?
I think that at least when we were writing YA, the market was pretty oversaturated, and it was really tough to like get noticed if you were writing quieter books. So we were both writing these sort of like quirky character-driven books that were like really realistic. Like, you know, like your YA novels were about anxiety.
Yeah.
And mine were just about like sort of bumbling around, making bad choices. And I feel like at that time, there was so much like really high concept fantasy and like all the romance novels were sort of spoken for. Like we had like the YA novelists who were doing romance, and we didn't really need any more. Yeah. It was super difficult, I feel like, to really make a splash as a quieter author in that market. Although I still like loved writing those books, and I did love like the connections with readers that I managed to make. And this time, I think because like this book is like adult literary, it's a little bit of a I don't know. I think fewer adult literary novels are published. I could be wrong. This is just my sense of what I see, like, in the sort of like book buzz on Twitter and stuff.
Maybe the publishers are a little bit pickier.
Yeah. Maybe. So there's been a little bit more attention this time, which feels really great. And then the other thing I think was, this might have been sort of like pandemic specific, but I ended up reaching out to some of my favorite authors who I never thought would give me the time of day. And I was writing to them as a just complete unknown, asking them for blurbs. And they all said yes, they all did it. And they were all like super willing to make that connection and to support me. And I think part of it was that I was sending these emails like in late March, and everybody felt really like as a publishing industry, we kind of needed to come together and stay afloat. I think people just, you know, we were all quarantined and we were lonely and panicking. And it was a time when people just felt like kind toward me. But those are the 2 things that come to mind.
What about you, Kerry?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Emily said about how it just seemed like there were so many YA books that it was hard to get anyone to notice yours, especially if, like you said, you're writing about girls with anxiety. Didn't really stand out as much. But yeah, my experience with romance has just been so different. But also, I would really recommend putting a celebrity's name in the title of your book, because it kind of gives you an instant hook.
Do you know if Tom Hanks has read your book?
What I always say is that I know that he is aware of its existence, And that's it. Like, I have not had any contact with Tom Hanks, unfortunately. I wish.
My stepmother wrote a book about with Elvis in it, and they dedicated it to Elvis. This is when he was still alive, because their plan was he would see the book and he would love it, and it would be the best thing he's ever read, and he has to meet them. So, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, well, it hasn't worked out for me either. It hasn't with Tom Hanks, yes, but I guess in his
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Emily, did you have any questions for Kerry?
I did not prepare any questions for Kerry, but I can think of some.
Another question for Emily. Like, it's something I am personally selfishly curious about. So we both have kids. Yours is 3. Mine just turned 4. So we were both writing our books when we had newborns. Mm-hmm. And I would just like to know, like, how physically did you do that? Because I know I did it. It was very difficult because you're always holding
an arm.
Yeah, like you're always holding a baby. Like, how did you actually get the book from your head out?
So the notes were all one-handed. So it was like the phone was like this, and then the baby was like this. And like the first notes I took were all while breastfeeding. And then when he got a little bit older and I was really drafting the novel, so this was like when he's about 6 months and we've moved to Ohio at this point, he would do this thing where he would like fall asleep on my body, but then I could move him onto like the mattress right next to me as long as his face was like smashed against my thigh in this very like Sid's whiskey way. And then I could write for like, I don't know, like a half hour.
I think of a lot then.
Oh.
How did you do it physically?
He would only nap in a rock and play, which you're not supposed to do.
Or something. I remember you telling me this.
And like they're dangerous, so you're not supposed to use them. But I would never leave him unattended, and I would sit beside him. Yeah, rock it with my foot.
Yeah,
typed, and I could get like an hour done sometimes, like that, moving it with my foot the whole time.
You find that as Harry has gotten older, you are like more, I don't know, pickier about like the circumstances under which you can get work done and like less willing to just write a book while he's like messing around.
Yeah, now it's so hard because it's not like I was used to having a lot of childcare. I had 5 hours a week where he was at preschool. But I was like, this is my nice quiet time at the library where I get a coffee and I get to focus.
Yeah.
And now it's like he is watching The Incredibles 2 in the other room and I'm overhearing that and I'm like, well, how am I supposed to concentrate? I can't do it.
Yeah. I think part of it is like when you have a newborn, you, first of all, you have a lot of like feelings. So you have a lot of things that you have to get down, but also you're not expected to write a book, right? So it's, any words you get down are like quite a triumph. Mm-hmm. And now it's just our jobs, and we have these children who are literally quarantined in our house. And it's like, it's just a lot. I don't know. And we had that taste where they were like a little bit more independent and could go to preschool and we were occasionally alone. And now none of that is taken away from you. And I can't get back to that mindset where I'm willing to write a book with his face smushed against my thigh, although I'm sure he would still like to nap that way.
Yeah, I know. And like our standards were low then, because I remember a lot of times if I had half an hour, I'd be like, well, I can either shower or I can write. And me now would pick showering, but me then would always pick writing. And I can't go back to that place where I didn't shower.
Yeah, you grew accustomed to a certain level of personal hygiene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hygiene in quarantine, like you have to make the effort. Like I will shower today. That is my goal.
Yeah.
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 So what would you guys consider, like we talked a little bit what I felt were similar elements in your books. Was there anything else that you guys felt were similar?
Well, I think Ohio as a city is similar. Very different regions in Ohio, very different vibes.
Yeah, although like not geographically very far from each other, which I don't know how much people realize both how like close the major cities in Columbus are to these really rural conservative areas, and also, how vastly different they are culturally. It's kind of like when I was living in rural Ohio, if I mentioned you know, that we had gone to Columbus for the day. Some people were like, ooh, like, how was that? As if we had like gone to like, a foreign country.
We never, like, very rarely went to Columbus when I was a kid, like maybe to go to the mall, and it is an hour away.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're going prom dress shopping in Columbus. And it was like cosmopolitan, like you were going to New York or something, you know?
Yeah. My mailman in Ashland, Ohio told me that his daughter had moved to Columbus, and he said this with like grief, like undercutting his voice. Like estranged now, and they could never really connect over those like 90 miles.
That's great. One of the things I liked about your book was that you were writing about, like, obviously the town that you had your characters live in, Deerling, is fictional. You didn't literally say this is Ashland, Ohio. But you wrote about it in a way that shows the negative parts, but was also respectful. Like, it wasn't like you were talking down to people, which is not something that people always do, especially I feel like in literary fiction.
So in my book, the character has spent her adulthood in New York City, which is a really difficult place to live. And it only gets more difficult when you start having children. Like, it's like the rent is really high. Logistically, like Amanda, the protagonist, talks about carrying her stroller in one hand, maybe on the other hand, up the steps.
Having the choice between what drink to get because you have to take it on the subway. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And as somebody who grew up in rural Ohio, like, she's going to know that difficulty is an option. Like, she doesn't need to be there. Like, neither she or her husband have jobs that really require them to be in New York. So I think, you know, a lot of the book is about wanting your life to be easier than it is in those first months after you have a kid. And it's also about just sort of like waking up in a life that you don't recognize as your own. So she's like very desperate to get back there. And then when she gets back to her hometown, it doesn't seem as she remembers it either. And part of that is because the book is set in 2016 during the election, and the whole town has gone kind of like wild for Trump. And then the other part of it is just that, like, our hometowns are never what we want them to be, in the same way that like our families are never exactly what we want them to be. But I think I didn't mean to, and I know that some people will take issue with the depiction of that town in the book, but I didn't mean to trash it. Like, I spent a year in the town on which Deerling is based, and I loved it. Like, it was just because I had lived in Toronto before that, and it was such a relief to like drive my car into this gravel driveway, unload the $200 worth of groceries that I bought all at once from and like, you know, take my kid into this like lovely little house with crickets in the backyard and like the breeze coming through the windows. Like, I was so happy at that time in my life to be living somewhere with space and with quiet, and it's beautiful. Like, rural Ohio is beautiful.
I mean, your character made the conscious decision to move back, or hopefully. So.
Yeah, she's trying to.
Yeah, when I have a best friend who used to live in New York City, and I remember she was so annoyed she couldn't get toilet paper, and so for her birthday, I shipped her the biggest like thing of toilet paper I could find, so it would be delivered to her front door.
Was this pre-virus or post?
This was like 4 years ago. So, this is back when people were still buying their toilet paper from like Target, the grocery store.
Right.
Yeah. So, but no, I did. That was fun. I was going to ask a question. Let me go back to my questions. Oh, so you talk about the similarities, but let's talk about what's different, because your genres, they're romance and like women's like fiction. Like, they're the same people would read them, but they're different. So let's talk about the differences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's hard, but I feel like ultimately my book it's not realistic, but it's a lot less, like, it's not open with a birth scene, you know. It's a lighter book.
I think also, like, when you're writing a rom-com, you can you use certain tropes on purpose. Right, like you're writing within a genre, and you play with that a little bit, because both your rom-coms are rom-coms about rom-coms. rom-coms, right?
Yeah, they're very meta.
Right. So when you have like an airport chase scene, you both, as the author, as the reader, and the characters know that this is like a reference to something.
Yes, like it is not supposed to be unexpected. Like Emily's book has a twist. I don't think.
But can you put a twist in a rom-com?
I feel like
Sure.
when you try it, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but have you seen Last Christmas?
No.
Okay, well, there is a twist in that movie, and people really hated it.
They did what?
They hated the twist.
They hated it?
Yeah.
Okay. You're supposed to know what's going to happen.
Yes, exactly. Like in a rom-com, you want to know.
And there's a happy ending.
Comforting that way.
Yeah. And in literary fiction, you don't know what's going to happen. There's not a predetermined set of tropes that's leading you to that happily ever after.
Yeah.
Like, what would you? Go ahead.
Sometimes I think that like literary fiction has more in common with genre fiction than we want to admit. Because I think something that all fiction relies on to some extent is like coincidences.
Yeah.
So like in Kerry's in Waiting for Tom Hanks, like there's a movie set in her neighborhood. Okay, coincidence number one. Her uncle like went to college with the director or something. Like that's preposterous. It works for that genre. And then I feel like with literary fiction we kind of I don't know. I mean, people nitpick it. Like they'll call you out for it not being realistic or being too coincidental. But then at the same time, like we're all doing that to some extent because our real lives don't have these like beginnings, middles, and ends. We need like characters to reappear conveniently. We need conversations to be had at the right moment. So I don't know. I feel like the main difference between our books is mine is probably darker.
Yeah.
Probably. And the plot is like a little bit more chaotic. It's not as expected.
Yeah, it's hard to have a chaotic rom-com.
Yours is also a lot. Like yours is a lot funnier. Yeah. Mine is not very funny. And
there are funny parts. I think so.
So where'd you guys? Okay, so Kerry, you said that you were talking about where you got the idea for your book.
Yes,
was from where? This was before we were talking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Where I got the idea for Waiting for Tom Hanks was it was from my blog. Well, sorry, was this from before? Like today?
You mentioned a movie was filmed. Has any movies been filmed in
okay, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, did I already say that? I couldn't remember. Okay. A movie was filming in German Village, the neighborhood in the book, and it was a John Travolta movie. And like I do love John Travolta, but I was like, what if it was a rom-com starring someone much younger than John Travolta? And I tried to mention John Travolta in the book actually as an example of a movie that had filmed there previously, and we took it out because we didn't want to reference anyone related to Scientology in case we like somehow disparaged them.
What movie was it?
I don't even remember is the thing. Like it was some sort of thriller type thing and I did not see it.
Let's see what else. We talked about friendship, emotionally hard. How'd you guys meet? Well, I think I've gone through everything that I wanted to talk about. So what do you guys want to talk about?
I would be curious to ask Emily, your book has a realistic birth scene in it.
Yeah.
We have talked about before about how there aren't a lot of those.
Yeah.
Can you think of anywhere in a book or a movie that has a really realistic birth scene? Because especially movies, I feel like.
Look Who's Talking. John Travolta.
Whoa.
I was thinking of like how unrealistic the birth scene in Knocked Up is because I watched it semi-recently. And every birth scene in a movie is always like somebody's water breaks.
Yeah, somebody's water breaks. And it happens like they're not in labor and then their water breaks.
All of a sudden they're in labor and the baby is like coming out right now. I know it's not how it happened for either of us.
No.
They can't put 2 days of labor into a movie. The movie's only so long.
Yes, that would be super boring.
That's true. It would be boring. I feel like, the depictions of childbirth, though, across the board, especially in film, are really unrealistic. Like, we've basically agreed on, like, a completely different experience that gets portrayed in films. Like, we've agreed that it happens with the water breaking, and then you rush to the hospital, and then the woman just screams like a maniac.
Yeah.
And then you push out a baby like pretty quickly. Like we've just sort of, and it's the same thing with like pregnancy. Like we've agreed that the way you find out you're pregnant is by puking in a like inconvenient moment.
Yeah. Anytime someone like starts puking in a movie, you can think, oh, she's pregnant.
I don't actually know anybody who literally had to vomit before they realized, or had the thought like, oh, I'm pregnant. But we've agreed. I don't know. We've just agreed as a society that this is how pregnancies are discovered. This is how children are born. So who am I to argue? Yeah. But no, the question of whether I can think of you were asking if I can think of a book where.
Yeah. Or anything. Yeah.
That's a really good question. And I feel like I have, and I feel like it's been really recent. So like Megan O'Connell's book, And Now We Have Everything is a memoir, but she hasn't you've read that, Kerry, right?
Yeah, that was honestly the only one I can think of.
So that's a memoir, and it's obviously really realistic and very, very drawn out. Like she recounts the multiple days it took her to get that baby out. And then there's a literary novel called 11 Hours by, I can't remember the author's name, but it's a really good book, so I'm going to look up her name.
I'm looking at books. I'm down here.
Her name is Pamela Aarons. And that the entire book is just like one person's labor.
Oh, wow.
It's really good. It's pretty scary. I think I read it before I gave birth, and I was like, I'm sure that's a unique experience.
Who wrote 11 Hours?
Pamela Aarons. So that's really realistic, but then I want to say that it doesn't. Yeah, I think it's the whole thing. I think it's like it begins when she goes into labor and it ends when she gives birth.
Oh, wow. See, I like
very good.
I was so like staying away from books about birth before I had my son because I never knew when they were going to get upsetting.
I devoured them. I could not stop reading stuff about childbirth.
I wanted to read more. But I wanted them all to have really like nice labors to like give me hope. And anytime anything got a little bit upsetting, I would shut the book. I'm like, nope, can't handle it.
Well, I remember you wrote about you wrote your birth story on your blog. And I read it before I gave birth. And I found yours to be like the most comforting thing I had ever read at that time.
Yeah.
Because you weren't like, oh, it was beautiful and I felt so powerful and like the ocean called my name. But you were like, okay, it wasn't perfect, but like everything was fine. I'm okay. Baby's okay. And you also had, like you were induced. I don't know if we're supposed to talk about the details of your labor.
That's fine. I did write a blog post about it, so
yeah. You were induced, and it wasn't like necessarily what you would have written down in your like journal of birth hopes and dreams, but everything was fine. And ultimately, I would not say that when I gave birth everything was fine, but I just remember like. I don't know, you wrote about it in a way that was like very bittersweet and very funny. And I just loved it.
Also, I was lucky that my experience was not incredibly traumatic. Like some bad things happened. I was like, would have preferred that didn't happen. But overall, it was okay. Like it was nothing that gave me any sort of lasting feelings.
You made a joke in that like blog post that I'm not going to repeat, but I think about it probably like every 3 days, and I just laughed at myself.
Well, yeah, if everyone wants to read my birth story, go to my blog.
I'll go find it.
Very long. There are a lot of details.
Is it on your webpage?
Yeah, it's on just called
Ladyville, right?
Yeah. I wish that wasn't my blog title. I am transitioning over to kerrywinfrey.com, but it hasn't happened yet.
What was your blog again? I'm sorry. Oh, wait, I found it.
Good.
Oh, wait, no, there's nothing on here. Oh, okay, I got it now.
Hopefully it's still on there. I had to go through and take off a bunch of old posts because people would email me about like my opinions about Taylor Swift in 2011. And it was like exhausting. Like I couldn't handle it anymore. But I'm pretty sure that post is still
there. It's still there.
Okay.
I turned to it in my times of need.
Do you guys still blog?
Kerry does sometimes.
I haven't done it for a while, but I do want to get back into it. Unfortunately, I love blogging. It's something I don't love about myself, but I can't help it.
I feel like your rom-coms were like the perfect bridge between your blogging voice and your fiction voice. Like,
I think that you're right.
Yeah. You just kind of like found the sweet spot between the way you are.
I wish you were blogging, Emily. I would love that.
Maybe I could do the newsletter thing, maybe.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's got a newsletter. Someone just asked me if I had one the other day, but I don't know.
It's very, like, when you've subscribed to a famous person's newsletter and then it shows up in your inbox with just their first and last name as if they've sent you an email, you get like a little thrill for a second.
I do. I'm always like, oh, finally, it's happening. Now they found me.
It happened. I subscribed to like Hillary Clinton's blog like during the election or newsletter, and there showed up Hillary Clinton's emailed me, and I was, oh my gosh, she got $50 and now she loves me.
The one that always gets me is like the PEN America emails that are sent with just Jennifer Egan's name. I'm just like, it's her. She's
like, this makes sense.
It's on, yeah.
So what are you guys working on now?
Kerry just finished a first draft of a third rom-com.
I did, yeah. My next book, which will hopefully be out next summer, but who knows with the way everything is. It's called Very Sincerely Yours, and it is about a woman who wants to kind of change her life after a breakup. So she starts going through a list. She wants to do one thing every day that scares her. And one of those things is emailing this local children's television host who's a puppeteer. She emails like the email address meant for children to email in their questions. And she has this massive crush on him. So then the book is kind of starts out with their pen pal emails back and forth.
Oh, I love that.
I read your proposal. So I've read like a few chapters.
It's a little bit weird, so.
No, it's really good. It was also, I think did you get the idea from the wave of like Mr. Rogers movies, or was that just a coincidence?
That was a coincidence because I got the idea because there was a Jim Henson exhibit in town in our local science museum, and I went like 3 times in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And got really heavily obsessed with it and would just like stare at all the pictures and captions and stuff. And I was like, why aren't there romance novels about puppeteers? Because young Jim Henson was hot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like this. You told me that like when you sent it to your editor, she was just like sexy Mr. Rogers. Like, yeah.
That's what she calls it now. She calls it sexy Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is more in the news than Jim Henson, so I get it. And honestly, the character has more in common with Mr. Rogers.
We have a really good puppeteer museum here in Atlanta. Like, yeah, like pieces of the Labyrinth live there.
How cool.
It's so good. You should Google it. They do great kid shows. And they've continued to move it. They moved it all online because they can't do it there. And so they do. Yeah, it's really good.
That's so fun. I'm going to check that out. My son is like obsessed with a clip of the Labyrinth he watched. We haven't watched the whole thing, but he's like really into it.
At his age, he might be scared, but he won't have any idea what's going on.
No.
Like my mom let me watch Grease when I was 6, and then as a teenager, I was like, "What were you doing?" She's like, "You don't know what's going on."
Kids don't. They don't know.
They don't know. They don't know. What are you working on, Emily?
I'm working on a book that I think is going to like take some people by surprise. It's about a sports reporter who is going after her ex-husband's job. And if she gets her ex-husband's job, she will be the first woman to call NBA games full-time on national television.
Ooh.
And then something happens and she basically is forced to choose between like making basketball history and sort of dedicating herself to her life as a mom. And it's loosely based on an actual person whose name is Doris Burke, who's like a beloved ESPN analyst. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of parallels to like her personal life and her career, and to her public persona. So like on the subject of whether famous people are gonna like read our books and care, like I'm not sure if I don't think she knows about it yet, but she will probably hear about it eventually. And I don't know what will happen, but I hope she likes it because I love her.
I think she will like it.
I hope. Yeah, I mean, it's a good portrait, a very like loving portrait of her. And so it's different than Everything Here is Under Control because it's about basketball. Like it's definitely a sports novel, but it's also about motherhood, and it's about marriage. It's about having ambition as a woman in like a very male dominated industry. So I think it both, it sounds like a really weird book for me to write, and it also is very much still like an Emily Adrian book.
Very cool. Okay, so I always like to ask, what did you guys read growing up?
I read so much growing up.
Yeah.
Like the books I always talk about are like the Beverly Cleary books, because I grew up in Portland, and those books are set in Portland.
Yeah.
And he just did such a good job of making like the regular stuff of being 5 years old into like riveting fiction. Nothing in those books is like novel or like high concept at all. Like it's literally just about these kids bumbling around, and they have less supervision than we did, and than certainly kids do now. But like it just made being a person seem really exciting. And I always kind of like, I think I've tried to write in that really hyper realistic style that's still like plot driven and still really entertaining. What books do you remember, Kerry?
Well, I read, like my bio that you read said, I would read pretty much any book I could get my hands on. But the one series that really stands out was I loved the Alice series by Philip.
Me too. Absolutely. Yeah.
Would reread those. Like for some reason, when I was a kid, it's like I didn't buy books ever. Like it didn't occur to me. I would just go to the library and check them out over and over and over. And I would just get them out of order and just read the same one over and over, because she was always embarrassing herself. And it was something I related to then and relate to now.
Yeah.
Like, she was constantly being humiliated. I loved reading about that.
What's the author again? I didn't hear that part.
Phyllis Reynolds Naylor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Alice books. They were kind of like, they were Judy Blumish, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
Who's that?
We on the call.
We just moved into this apartment, and he's like not used to hearing, like, he doesn't know the specific neighbors who might go up the stairwell. Hank. Quiet. The Alice books were like, they were Judy Blume-ish, but I feel like there was a different quality to them. Like they were a little bit more innocent.
I think so.
They still got into like puberty, and as she got older, they got into like some sexy stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe the difference is like Alice was just this like, where was she from?
Tacoma Park, Washington. Right? Is that it?
Maryland, right?
Maryland, yeah. Tacoma.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah. I feel like Alice was like distinctly like middle class.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
I loved her, and I just loved like how she always had so many questions about everything that was happening. And like everyone was always like, why are you asking these? And like kind of embarrassed to explain things to her, which was again something I really related to. We had a lot of questions and nobody would answer.
There's so much stuff from those books that I just like remember and think about regularly, like the pencil test.
Yep.
I don't know. Like, has anyone not performed a pencil test?
Yeah, that was a big one. And I think all the time about how she said she wished that everyone who had seen her like in an embarrassing situation would just disappear, not die, but just disappear off the face of the earth. And that's another thing that I'm like, I wish that.
Unfortunately, I would have no friends or family members.
It would just be you wandering the earth alone.
But at least no one would know.
Fun things about when your kids get older is sharing this stuff with them. So forcing them to read the books that you loved as a kid or the movies that you loved to watch. It's like re-experiencing them for the first time. Like when my kids were old enough to do Harry Potter, it was great. Yeah.
That's so fun. Yeah, my husband's really looking forward to that with our son.
And we did Harry Potter's audiobooks, and I remember sitting in the car in the driveway, and Dobby's about to die, and I just immediately start crying because I know what's happening, and I'm slapping my son and grabbing his hand and holding it, and he's like, "What is wrong with you?" Wait, it's yeah.
Speaking of audiobooks, Emily, I would love to know if you've listened to your audiobook.
I've heard a sample of it. So like my publisher sent me 3 auditions basically, and I got to pick the person who recorded it, and I immediately like just knew that she was the person to do it. She has this sort of, I don't know where the actress is from, but her accent sounded like believably Midwestern, and she had a sort of like deadpan delivery, and I just knew that she was like the person. But I haven't listened to it. Have you listened to yours?
No.
Are you going to?
I have heard the sample of each one. And I know that they're both really good, and I hear such good things about them. But I can't do it. I cannot hear someone else like reading back my words to me. It's just like, it is mortifying. I'm like, oh, I wrote that. I can't.
Writing is really embarrassing.
Yes.
Like, it's one of the more embarrassing things you can do.
It definitely is. Whenever somebody like quotes your book to you, it's like, I want to fall into a hole.
Yeah, it's horrible. I agree. It should be banned.
What are you guys reading now?
I just finished The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett.
Oh wow!
Have you read that yet?
We're gonna I think do that for book club.
Well, that's a good book club book. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah,
it's so good. It's like one of, you know how like this like quarantine is like this long phase of our lives that's only broken up by like a very few special things, and I feel like that was one of the things. I was there like 3 days where I was reading that book, and I was just like, I am happy again. And now it's over.
Yeah, that's a good one. I just finished a book today, but it's not out until February, so it is kind of annoying to talk about. It was really good.
Are you blurbing it?
Yes, I am blurbing it. It's The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. She's another who writes YA, but this is her first adult romance with Berkeley, and it is a rom-com about public radio hosts, which is so fun. I met my husband at our college radio station, which is not as professional as public radio, but still, it was really fun to read.
Did you listen to Hollis' station before you knew him?
Well, no, because his show was directly after mine.
Oh, okay.
We met, like, I think maybe it was the first day that we had our shows. Yeah. It was Friday nights. Mine was 9 to 11 with my roommate, and then his was 11 to 1, which really shows like how little we were going out in college. Like, Friday night from 9 to 1 in the morning, we were like, yeah, I have nothing else better to do. I can be in this radio.
I don't know if I've told you this, but like Dan also had a college radio station. And his was on in the middle of the night, and we were dating long distance at the time. So I used to like set my alarm and get up and listen to his voice on the radio. And in hindsight, he like affected a certain, like he like dropped his voice an octave and had this like late night radio.
It's funny.
That's really cute. And, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, my roommate and I would go back to our room and order pizza and listen to Hollis' show.
Yeah.
But it was like him and his 2 roommates, so they were not trying to impress anybody.
What was like the theme of their show?
I don't know. Our radio station, I loved it because it was not super professional.
Yeah.
You did not really need to have a theme so much as you just needed to show up. I remember a lot of times we tried to get in, the station would be locked, so we couldn't even show up. Mm-hmm. It was just like weird.
Was it broadcast on like could people outside of the college listen to it?
Nope. No, it was just online. That's what it was. Oh, okay. They had no actual radio signal anymore. It was just online. And I think we had like 4 listeners maybe. Yeah. That was it.
Precursor to podcasts.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're reaching that time. Guys, I want to thank you for doing this. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed your books. And I read a lot, and I really enjoyed your books. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much,
guys. So, Kerry and Emily have agreed to send me some book plates. So we will have autographed copies of their books available. Support your local independent bookstore. It doesn't have to be this independent bookstore, but we would prefer it. But I totally get it. Do you guys have an indie bookstore that you like to shop at?
I do. Mine is the Book Loft in German Village, which is in the books.
Did they have an owl?
Yes, they do.
Yes, I know them. They're really nice. Mm-hmm. They're nice.
I just moved here from Richmond, Virginia, where my local bookstore was Fountain Bookstore.
I love Fountain. Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing an event with them next week with Ruthie Thorpe. And they are so great. And they are also like a great place to order a book from or pre-order a book from if you're not going to order it from Read It Again.
I love it. I know both your bookstore people. That's great.
Yeah.
It's a small community. Okay, so let's recap. You should buy their books. You should buy it from me, or you should buy it from another independent bookstore, but you should support an independent bookstore. Preferably Read It Again, Fountain Books, and what was the name of yours again?
The Book Loft.
The Book Loft. Yes, those are our favorites, and you should go there. Anyway, thanks again, guys, for doing this. This is really nice of you. Yeah, that's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you so much. It was super fun.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.